Good morning, folks. My name is Jimmy Bajar with the ISO Stakeholder Affairs Group. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the California ISO call to discuss the draft tariff language for Phase 3B of the Energy Storage and Distributed Energy Resources, or our ESDR initiative. I'm joined this morning here also by my colleagues, Bill Weaver from Legal, who will be leading today's discussion, as well as Jill Powers, Bridget Sparks, and John Gooden from our Market and Infrastructure Development Policy Group. Our agenda for today, as with all of our tariff calls, will be to review the draft tariff language that we are proposing to file with FERC. Of course, if you recall, the ESDR Phase 3 initiative was approved long ago by our board, and we had thereafter split the implementation of this initiative into two phases, A and B, with A having already been implemented, and we are here today, of course, to finalize Phase B's proposed filing in preparation for its upcoming October implementation, which, as you may recall, Phase B consists of the new proposed load shift products for behind-the-meter storage, as well as the proposed measurement of load curtailment by behind-the-meter electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSEs. You can, of course, refer to all ESDR material, which is housed on its own stakeholder processes landing page on our website at kaiso.com. Over the Stay Informed tab, and then click on the Stakeholder Processes link. In addition, the calls and webinars are recorded for stakeholder convenience, allowing those who are unable to attend to listen to recordings after the meetings. Recordings will be publicly available on the ISO webpage for a limited time following the meetings. Of course, the recordings and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And lastly, of course, if you have any questions, please raise your hand virtually by pressing #2. And we, of course, request that you please state your name and the company that you represent. And with that, I'll hand it over to Bill.
Thank you, Jimmy. Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. This is for the ESDR 3B tariff revisions. I'll handle some administrative issues on the top, and then we'll walk through these. We received no stakeholder comments on these tariff revisions. This is our, third tariff phase that has added new demand response methodologies, and so I attribute the lack of comments due to, it's now largely a copy and paste effort with, making the differences in the new methodologies. So we have some proficiency in making these, working with our stakeholders. In any case, I'm not going to read these out loud to everyone, so we'll just go over them rather quickly, and if stakeholders have comments, you can raise them. On the other hand, if people have not had a chance, have not had an opportunity to review, they can take that opportunity and feel free to email me or, the stakeholder initiative email up until around, late July. We plan to file this on or about August 1st. And when I say about, it would probably be before August 1st, late July, based on the October 1st fall implementation. But as I said before, if you want to submit late comments, feel free to just email them directly to me at bweaver@kaiso.com, or just give me a call, and I'll happy to walk through or discuss any pertinent issue. Okay, with that said, I'm going to go through these rather quickly. There's only two sets in this ESDR 3B. We covered the other half of the revisions in ESDR 3A, which has already been filed and approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The two elements of the policy that we're implementing in the tariff this go-round are the separate demand response measurement calculation for EVSEs, which is not a term I created, but an industry term for electric vehicle supply equipment, which is basically everything that charges electric vehicles, and of course includes the charging energy itself. And second, we have the new load shift methodology for behind-the-meter energy storage demand response, which we'll get into. So we start with EVSE. This is the standard definition. It includes the load and energy for charging the electric vehicle. I apologize as we go through this. As I said, I'm not going to read every single tariff provision aloud, and therefore we're going to go through this quickly, and I understand that can cause nausea, but I'll try to keep it to a minimum, just work my way down. You'll see as normally we just kind of go through the various sections. Section 4 is roles and responsibilities, basically saying, who does what and which tariff provisions to look at. So not much here. If you're using the load shift methodology, you couldn't elect hourly blocks, but you can do 15 or 5-minute intervals for real time. Okay, now we're just going to return to same thing here. Both the EVSE element of ESRA 3B and the load shift methodology are variations on the theme of proxy demand resources, and so you'll see us expounding here on those two types, basically more cross-references here, and fixing a typo from previous changes. All right, so this is 4.13.4.6, which is the entirety of the revisions for the EVSEs. And basically all we're saying here is that if you have a separate EVSE load and you want to calculate a separate baseline for it to participate as a proxy demand resource, you're allowed to do so long as it's separately metered and calculates its own customer load baseline. So you imagine a Whole Foods with a charging station for its customers. It's understandable that the Whole Foods would have very different, load patterns than the EVSEs attached. And so those could all participate as one PDR, or you could break them out and have a separate baseline. And so we've just tried to capture that here. EVSE baselines do not use an adjustment factor. And that's pretty much it. And that's pretty much it for EVSEs in general. So I'll pause here just to see if anyone has any questions about the EVSE language before we move on to the load shift methodology. All right, well, not hearing our operator, Jimmy, let me know if there's anyone in queue, but we'll move on to load shift methodology. So the load shift methodology tariff revisions are, are meatier than the EVSE methodology, the EVSE provisions. But that's only because there's just a little more to do. Essentially, though, these tariff provisions are very similar to the existing meter generator output methodology, which is also, based on the original 10 and 10 customer load baseline methodology. The difference, of course, we see is that this is broken out into two different resource IDs. One is the consumption resource ID, which is for charging the battery that's behind the end user. And then we have the curtailment resource ID, which is for discharging to curtail on-site load. And the idea here is that we are trying to account for someone using a battery, charging at the right time and discharging at the right time based on, the peak and off-peak periods being a good battery participant for our duck curve. There's not much to say here. This looks essentially very much like the meter generator, the VMGO methodology, where you have a number of targets. I mean, this is on 15-minute intervals rather than a trading hour or trading day, but you're still collecting those, 5 to 10 intervals based on similar days, excluding outages or previous responses. The only real difference is here in these subsections B and C, where the meter data for the consumption resource ID only looks at charging and zeroes out everything else because, you know, it's the other side of the coin. The curtailment resource ID will do the opposite and look at only that, which is above 0 megawatt hours, only the discharging. So the entire response of the battery is looked at, but based on, you know, split into these separate resource IDs, which is just consistent with the policy. Where it gets a little extra tricky is that you can also have, you know, essentially a third calculation on top of these two for the curtailment of load of the on-site load that has nothing to do with the battery itself. So you can factor that in as well and also receive a demand response energy measurement for that. So for example, the load shift methodology itself is looking at, you know, what a battery is doing to charge at the right time, but also, you know, if you're operating your toaster during peak hours, you could look at and make sure that you know, the battery is discharging to provide energy to that toaster. However, you could also be discharging the battery for other uses or not be discharging the battery, but simply not be making your toast when you normally make toast, and the methodology would also account for your, you know, your voluntary curtailment of load without using the battery. So basically, everything possible to get your demand right. This is the settlement section. It basically, you know, just says what it always says, that demand response energy measurement is equal to the difference between the baseline, either the generator output baseline for discharging or the customer load baseline for charging and typical load use, minus the actual meter data at the time of the dispatch. And it's just saying these can all be added on. This is all very similar to existing demand response calculations and provisions. We're almost done here. This is the bidding and scheduling of PDRs using the load shift methodology. It's very similar to the existing bidding and scheduling of all other PDRs provisions, with the difference you see here in subsections 3 and 4, where we're just breaking out what the curtailment resource ID can do. That's slightly different in terms of self-scheduling, but again, that's still pretty consistent with PDRs generally, so nothing really new here. And then the one difference that for the consumption resource ID, bids need to be below $0 a megawatt hour because, you know, they're charging, which is all spelled out in the policy, so there shouldn't be any surprises here. Lastly, for the RA counting, we've just included a provision that says qualifying capacity will exclude the demand reduction performance for the consumption resource ID, that is the charging aspect. But the curtailment of load by the battery and the curtailment of the load just by, you know, making less toast, as it were, those would still be included in the qualifying capacity. So that is the entirety of the tariff revisions. I'll pause here to see if anyone has any questions. But like I said, if you haven't had a chance to really look at this carefully, take that chance and feel free to follow up with me or reach out to stakeholder affairs, and they can put you in contact with me, and we can talk up to, you know, hopefully through July. But we do plan to file on or a little before August 1st. So, see, any questions?
Thanks, Bill. I don't believe we have any questions as of yet, but I'll give folks maybe a few seconds more, and we'll wait for you open the lines up if any. As Bill mentioned, happy to take comments afterward as well. So.
We got a caller in the queue.
Hi, this is Bob from Connect. Just had a couple clarifying questions, if you don't mind. So first, I think it was on page 4, the tariff talked about the consumption piece and which data is zeroed out. So I just wanted to clarify that, I think this is what you had said, but just to clarify, for the load curtailment methodology, that would remain the same where any negative consumption is zeroed out. And so then for the consumption ID, is this basically saying if a battery is discharging, then that data would be zeroed out and treated as zeros instead of as a flip sign? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right. For this methodology, I mean, batteries can participate in the other methodologies, and there isn't this zeroing out function. It would be just kind of looking at the overall average response of what it's doing. But yeah, for here, it's one or the other because you have the 2 resource IDs that are only looking at charging or only looking at discharging.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see. Thanks. That's helpful. And then I also had a question too, just at the end, talking about the bidding requirements and the bidding market participation. There was a line just at the very end. Sorry, please keep going. Yeah, right here, the second to last sentence talking about submissions of energy shelf schedules in the real-time market up to its day-ahead market schedule in the same trading hour. I was just trying to understand how that works functionally. So the resources, the consumption resource will still be participating in both the day-ahead and the real-time market. Is that right? And then is there a limit to how it can participate in the real-time market where it can only participate up to how much energy it was bidding in the day-ahead market?
No, this is just a self-scheduling rule in that the consumption resource ID is only allowed to self-schedule. It can't set, all we're saying here, and this is very similar to the rule for all PDRs, but for the consumption resource ID here, we're just reiterating that it can't self-schedule in day ahead, but if it receives an award in day ahead, it can self-schedule in real time up to that day-ahead award. And in fact, I think our software auto-populates a self-schedule for real time for that award. So that's all it says.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Thanks for clarifying that.
No problem. See, any other questions?
I'm not seeing any other questions in queue at this time.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Again, if you want to reach out to me, I'm at bweaver@kaiso.com. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jimmy. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Bill. And Bill mentioned, yeah, thanks, folks, for your time, given the current events out there. Appreciate your engagement. As mentioned, look out for the recording for this to be available within the next couple of business days. And have a great rest of your morning, folks. Please, of course, don't hesitate if you have further comments, as Bill mentioned. And with that, take care. Thanks so much.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.